Hey, so why don't we use this as the occasion to start? The first thing I'll note is the absence of Charles, who is unfortunately called away for urgent business and is not available now. I'm sure he's off doing good things. So I'm going to take the opportunity to welcome you and also to welcome and meet Rabbi Akiva Zweig. Rabbi Akiva, we're meeting for the first time today, and I just read about you. Rabbi Akiva seems to have done many things. He learned at Ner Yisrael. Where else and got a degree from the Talmudic Academy? Rabbi Zweig, can you just remind me?
Sure. Yeah, I learned most of the years under my father in Miami Beach, but also in Baltimore and in Israel.
Okay. So I thought, Rabbi Zweig, what we could do is we would start off with you, and then we'll see how we'll structure the rest of the time. But I thought we'd first give you the opportunity to speak.
Sure, I'm happy to. I know the general topic. I should just speak to that topic or any specific question?
So, I mean, we can sharpen the question to start out with, which is,
sure.
How can we, in what way does Hanukkah as a holiday help us understand versions of contemporary anti-Semitism?
Okay, awesome.
That for me is a good question.
Okay, great. So I'm not sure everybody on the call, so maybe somebody can clue me in if I need to do more or less background on what my remarks are. I don't know the audience, but I'd like to start with what's actually timely always for us Jews at this time of the year, which is the section of the Bible that deals with Joseph in Egypt, and specifically his rise to power and his eventual reign as a viceroy in Egypt for 80 years. So that's the area I would like to start with. And the reason I think it's such a huge place for us to draw both lessons plus inspiration is that Joseph is the undisputed both manager and, for all practical purposes, ruler of the greatest civilization of that time, which is the Egyptian Empire. And I think the fact that he succeeds unbelievably well in his role is something that we Jews really need to look at, and how to position ourselves, whether it be specifically in government or just at the center of people's attention, and what the example of a Jew is and how can it work well, as opposed to what we're all afraid of and is happening now, especially in light of recent events, where Nazism is being raised as maybe a good thing, and that I think is why I would like to focus on that. That's where I'm coming from. Is that a good starting place?
Great.
Okay, awesome. So there's a story that precipitates Joseph's leadership in Egypt, and that is that he's first sold by his brothers, which we're not going to talk about today, although I'm sure there's much to learn from that as well, where he then becomes a slave to the household of what is known at that time as the Egyptian executioner for the king. His name is Potiphar. Joseph becomes his slave. And what happens in that household is that Joseph becomes the manager of the estate, and everything is put under his control, and he's seen as the effective boss of everyone else in that home, except for, of course, his boss, who's Potiphar. And the only thing that's really off limits to Joseph is the boss's wife, that we call her the wife of Potiphar. And the way the story unfolds is that she is very attracted to Joseph, and she propositions him actually many times, to the point where it's obviously not such a comfortable situation for Joseph. He refuses, and one day, perhaps, it's a question, but perhaps he's intending to finally succumb to her desire of him. And it turns out that in the last moment, Joseph runs out of the house as she's grasping his clothing, and his garment is left behind in her home, in her grasp. And he leaves, and the wife that had been pursuing Joseph decides to really do a two-face on him, And she then waits for Joseph's master to come home. She has the garment next to her, and she says to the master, Potiphar, this Hebrew boy that you brought us, he obviously tried to lie with me and have, improper relations. And, he's made a mockery of us. And it's terrible what he did. And so Potiphar decides to put Joseph into prison. And he does. And Joseph is in jail for 12 years. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but the first thing that the rabbis teach us about this story is that when Joseph is in jail, there's a lot of negative attention being given to Joseph. And according to the rabbis, it seems that the news cycle, which is this Hebrew boy, lasts for at least about 9 or 10 years. And everybody's talking about Joseph and what he did and this travesty, and it's extremely scandalous. That's the first thing. The second thing that the rabbis teach us is that Joseph is ultimately remembered to Paro because he correctly interprets the dream of a butler and a baker, and Joseph eventually ends up in front of Paro, and he correctly interprets Paro's dream, and that's when he's made viceroy of Egypt, and everything is put under his control. Now we're going to get to one other point that the rabbis teach us after, but just to kind of finish this point, it seems that the message here is that Joseph is a big subject of attention to the point where it lasts for many years. And that's just kind of really surprising. And my question is, why? It's not like decadence and sexual impropriety wasn't commonplace in Egypt. It definitely was. The Torah speaks about it in many places. And there's no question that this kind of behavior is not exactly, uncommon in Egypt. So why is everybody paying it so much attention? And so my answer to that question, which I look at as really the first anti-Semitic libel against Joseph and therefore the Semites, being a Hebrew is from the lineage of Shem, and he was a Semite. And the Hebrews, even at that time, based on Abraham, who was also a Hebrew, and Isaac and the brothers, etc., based on their impact in the world, they became known as extremely powerful, rich, and smart people. That was the reputation. If anybody wants citations and sources, I'm happy to give them. And the point is that the Egyptian society was very afraid that Joseph would come in and take over. And really what the wife of Potiphar so cleverly and strategically does is she makes it the talk of the town, because what she really does is she takes the garment that Joseph left in her hand, she puts it down into the bed next to her, and she waits for the husband to come home. He walks into the bedroom, he sees the garment of his trusted servant lying next to his wife, which is the only thing that he didn't give Joseph any jurisdiction or control over. And she's saying to Potiphar, Joseph didn't just want to have relations with me, he wants to become the master of the household. He plans to take over. He's ousting you as a significant character in your own home. And you can imagine the fear factor for that, because he really did put everything in Joseph's control, and he was relying on Joseph, and he was happy to, because Joseph made him incredibly successful. So, having planted that seed, she works for the next several years to foment this kind of negative speaking about Joseph, to the point that even though Joseph is clearly seen as talented and clever and business-oriented and capable, she says, yeah, but at the end of the day, he wants to take over, he wants to be in control. And that's essentially what people are afraid of when it comes to the Jews. That hasn't changed. And the fact that, Joseph is able to win over the trust of the entire Egyptian nation is an amazing thing. And that's really the second part of my comments here today. And I'd like to suggest what he does and how he does it as a lesson for us to learn about dealing with contemporary anti-Semitism, and a Chanukah message on top of that. And my understanding is that the main trust that Joseph is able to build is based on the fact that with all the power and position of greatness and control that Joseph is given, we never find that he ever takes any advantage of that position or power or control, except to help the government succeed, except to help the leadership to their purposes and for what they're trying to do for their people, their nation. And so it's never about him. You know, Joseph works for 80 years in that capacity. And we never find that Joseph takes a private airplane to wherever in order to whatever. He is just beyond reproach trustworthy because he never actually does take advantage for himself, ever. And that brings us to one additional message that the rabbis tell us about Joseph. And that is, as we know, when Joseph, sorry about the background noise, and that is that when Joseph finally and, actually is the viceroy of Egypt, and his prediction about 7 years of plenty is soon followed by 7 years of famine, and the famine begins, the people go to Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, there's no bread, no food. What are we supposed to do? So Pharaoh says to them, excuse me, Joseph told you to save food. Why didn't we save food like he predicted, that there would be a famine? And the people respond, we did, but it all became rotten. So Pharaoh says, well, then you for sure have to listen to him because his food is not rotten. And so whatever he tells you to do, you have to listen to. So they said, but he's telling us to become circumcised people. He wants us to undergo circumcision. And Pharaoh says, he's in control. He has the power to do whatever he wants. You better listen to Joseph. Now that's kind of an astonishing piece of news, as most of us don't know that from the text, but that is a tradition of well over several thousand years, that is what Joseph asked from the Egyptian people. And my question is why? What logic is there in Joseph asking for the Egyptian people to circumcise themselves? It seems to make no sense whatsoever. And so my answer is because Joseph is teaching them and us an incredible lesson about, number one, being a human being, and number two, being a Jew, so to speak, in charge of the people of his era. And that is, most systems of government in the world depend on the golden rule. The man with the gold rules. Power and control come when you have money. And so therefore, most systems of government depend on that. Certainly authoritarian systems, but as we know, and what we're afraid of, even in the more cultured governments that have developed over the last many hundreds of years, we're always worried about the people in charge of government using government as a pretext for their own financial gain and power. And what Joseph is telling people is that if your goal in life is to indulge and to have pleasure, you will by definition build a pyramid power structure where people are always going to be looking for power grabbing and control, and a coup is always at hand. But if you can teach yourself some measure of indulgence control, and not just to give in to whatever your heart desires, but learn to measure your desires, learn to practice some discipline, then a person can actually become a person that is thinking about others, that is not only looking to take the entire pizza pie for himself, but he can actually learn an abundance mentality. And that's really the best ways for societies to thrive. When the people who are in charge are actually looking to help other people also have abundance. And the idea of circumcision is taught to us also by the rabbis is that it diminishes a little bit of the pleasure of relations, and it gives a person a paradigm shift about how to think about pleasure, how to think about desire, how to think about that which I covet and want. And it gives that person the ability to begin measuring their behavior and asking themselves, is this really a good thing? Is this how I want to live my life? If every single person acted on, you can imagine, on every single impulse that they ever had in that arena of immorality and sexuality, not to mention in stealing or any other kind of covetous endeavor that a person undertook, society would quickly evaporate. There's no way for people to live as caring and neighborly, responsible citizens if that's the way that everybody behaves. And so therefore, Joseph is telling them the reason that there's famine in the world, the reason that there's scarcity is actually a message from a higher power that we need to work on our indulgence and our entitlement. And if I look to a cause of anti-Semitism throughout the millennia as the cause, it's always when there's economic downturn and looking to blame. And that's precipitated by a society that has become completely entitled and narcissistic and self-indulgent, and people have no concept of sharing and giving other people from their wealth in abundance and trying to encourage everybody to have more than enough. And that's the lesson that I think that Yosef is teaching us, Egyptian society, and also a major lesson of Chanukah. You know, at the end of the day, the Chanukah miracle is about the fact that miracles happen. It's about the fact that you could have a much stronger army, a pervasive ideology, which at that time was the Greek ideology. And that doesn't in any way, shape, or form determine the outcome of either us as a people or what the world will look like a little while later after the latest, powerful thinking ideology has emerged onto the world stage. And even the Jewish people that are always to blame, many systems that quote unquote want to take over and be in charge of the world, they can never get rid of the Jews. People are at the end of the day not in charge. God is in charge, and a whole different discussion is, okay, so why do bad things happen to good people? We're not going to discuss that today, but as a that we want to share with the world, Einstein said, there's only two approaches to life, or everything is a miracle. And that is the lesson of Chanukah, that which we take for granted, that which we assist and giving it to human beings. And we have to recognize that that, in fact, is a miracle. And if we bring that message to the world as Jews, we become trustworthy. And instead of being the cause of all the bad and evil in the world, we actually become recognized as the cause of good and abundance and sharing. I'm done.
Very nice. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Zweig. That was just a brilliant analysis of the biblical story and the application of it to contemporary anti-Semitism, and also sharing with us those messages. So thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. And also, I'll say you navigated many topics, and it sounds like you're also navigating certain roads or streets wherever you are.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't know the time of our.
We're grateful. We're grateful that you're here. So, if you want to hang on, Rabbi Zweig, or
Yes, I'm very happy to participate. I'm listening. I'm on.
Excellent. So, since I had a little bit of extra time, I thought I would talk to you a little bit more in depth about the question that I was asking before. That is there a relationship between contemporary anti-Semitism and Chanukah? And I think in very broad terms, we could think of there being really two kinds of anti-Semitism, in America today especially. Now, one, you can see my screen here, everybody? Yeah? Rabbi Zweig, you can't, but it's a picture of Charlottesville in 2017. And this is the famous march where somebody actually got killed, right? Oopsie. And there's another photo here. And they, In Charlottesville, the white supremacists, so we have to remember, always remember, we talk a lot about left-wing anti-Semitism. Remember that right-wing anti-Semitism is equally important. And we have to see it as a totality. If you think it's only one side, you're not seeing the problem. So this version of anti-Semitism is, we're replacing you. So at Charlottesville, they say Jews will not replace us, but this is what I would call replacement anti-Semitism. We are replacing you. It has a very, very, very long pedigree, actually. The pedigree goes back to ancient Rome or to the early church. The early church, they take over the place of Jerusalem. They become the chosen people, or their universalist claims push off the particularity of the Jewish people. We are you. There's a midrash that says that the nations of the world would say, Anu Yisrael, we are Israel. So the Charlottesville is one version. We are replacing you. Early in 17th century England, London was the New Jerusalem. In America in the 18th century, Boston is the city on the hill. What hill? The hill in Jerusalem. We are replacing you. We're moving you out. That's actually not the anti-Semitism of Chanukah. It's a different one. Anti-Semitism of Chanukah is represented more by this. So this was just to explain for those of you who are not completely familiar. In 2017, there was a a march of a intersectional group of dykes, of lesbians coming together. They refer to themselves as dykes, as lesbians coming together and arguing for their rights. Now, what happened at this march, and you can see even just from the picture, that
Don't just maximize your PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Perfect. So you can see from the image that this really is an intersectional gathering, but and this is really relevant today. But for all of their claims of universality, there's one group that was not allowed to come. This group, the people with the Zionist flags. They were told, you cannot be part of our intersectional gathering. It's the one group that gets singled out. And it's not just that Jews are like, we're just excluding them. It's actually the Jews themselves who are the basis of their whole ideology. The whole universalist ideology is based upon the exclusion of the Jews because we make particular claims. Chanukah is very, very much about the claims of particularity against the claims of universalism. By the way, people, everybody's with me here. When I'm in a classroom and it's live, I can actually see and hear people. So as Rabbi Zweig said, if anybody wants to chime in or ask a question, please, I would appreciate it if you did so. This is more recently, I think this was also 2017, I don't remember. This is the Moshava food truck in Philadelphia. They sell, what did they sell? Israeli-inspired cuisine, falafels, and they were asked at the gathering in the giant parking lot where all these vans and food trucks gathered, they were asked to park outside. Again, the one group that gets excluded. And that one group, again, the Jews, we are the basis of their whole universalism is based upon the exclusion of the Jews. So that's a different kind of anti-Semitism. We have the replacement anti-Semitism, and then I would call this almost like the assimilationist idea of anti-Semitism. I don't know, maybe we can come up with something better for it. And here, actually, since we have time, Daphne, we usually go to about 7 o'clock. Is that right? We have about a half hour. Yeah. So I thought I would go over some sources with you. I know it's early in the morning in America. And I'll do my best to make this clear so you can see them. Okay. So I'm one of the weird things about contemporary progressives is that their antecedent are early Christians. meaning it's Paul who comes and says, and here Paul is very Greek, there is neither Greek nor Jew. Neither Greek nor Jew. What ideas or what ideologies behind that? Don't distinguish yourselves. The Greeks, they represent, for Chazal, for the rabbis, this kind of universalism. Their wisdom spread. The rabbis say the Greeks had more knowledge than any other nation. But we should think about this. Why can't the Greeks, the wisest of the nations, why can they not abide the existence of the Torah? And here, while I drink a little bit of water, I'll ask somebody maybe to chime in and give us something to think about. Anyone? Don't be shy. One of the things I learned during COVID is that you can accommodate very long silences on Zoom. I don't mind, right? But I'll go on. I'll open up things a little bit. So Torah is distinctive. Torah is distinctive. And the Greeks cannot handle a knowledge that claims to be distinctive and better than theirs. If somebody says, the Midrash says, if somebody says there is wisdom among the nations of the world, you must believe it. But if they say there's Torah among the nations of the world, don't believe it. The Greeks want to make everything equivalent. That's part of their universalism. So here's a passage from Jewish legal text, the Mishnah Berurah. I'll read it to you. I think we'll just read it in English. The Assyrian Greek Hellenist Antiochus did not decree to kill the Jews and destroy them. And here there's a contrast between the Purim story, where Haman wanted to exterminate all of the Jews, but rather to cause them suffering that they would abandon their faith. For if Israel had submitted to the Greeks and abandoned their faith, they would have been satisfied. The rabbis say there are 4 exiles. The Greek exile is the only time in which the people of Israel are actually living in Israel, because the Greek exile is a way of alienating the Jew from his heritage. So the Assyrian Greek Hellenist, he doesn't want to kill them. What did Haman do? And you can think about Purim and Chanukah as a kind of contrast. Haman wants to kill all the Jews. I mean, also, you can go back. The sin of the Jews, or the transgression of the Jews, is they drink too much at the feast of Achashverosh. So they showed up in the first place. That's the first thing that happens. Haman wants to kill them. They're saved. And how do we celebrate on Purim? Like we do on every holiday, we eat, right? In abundance. There's really no mitzvah. There's no mitzvah really per se to eat on Chanukah, because Chanukah is not a holiday about the body. Chanukah is a holiday about the mind. And the Universalist Antiochus said, you can have your Chanukah parties or whatever, eat your latkes or do any of those things you want to, but don't distinguish yourselves as a nation. I mean, you can have customs like everybody else, that's fine, but don't say you're special. For if Israel had submitted to the Greeks and abandoned their faith, they would have been satisfied. It's almost like you take, it's there was a movie from the 70s, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? So this is not the body snatchers. The Greeks are these, like, they're mind or soul snatchers, right? So the Maharal's got a whole book about this called Ner Mitzvah, and he just points out the nature of the Greek exile. It's strange. The nature of the Greek exile is their wisdom. The wisdom of the Greeks spread from all sides, the length and breadth of the world without limits. And for this reason, the Greeks did not oppose Israel except for their adherence to the Torah. That's very important, right? And this was the whole essence of Greece, to nullify Israel's connection to the Torah. Oh, I see. It's not only the Greeks wanted to stop Jewish practice. And by stopping Jewish practice, to turn them into a version of Paul's Greeks, neither Greek nor Jew. But this is really fascinating, isn't it? Does anybody know here? I'm trying one more time. Does anybody know here what do the rabbis say are the practices that the Greeks took aim at? What were the things that the Greeks prohibited? Okay.
Prayer, gathering to pray.
Well, so that probably gets included in one of them. But the three things that they said are, this is interesting, I think. One is Brit Milah, one is Rosh Chodesh, and the other is Shabbat. Now, these three things cover, in these three prohibitions, we can get a sense a little bit of what the Greeks were up to. Why would they prohibit Brit Milah? The Jews saying, my body is distinctive, right? I'm marking my body in a distinctive way, right? Greeks say, you can't do that. We don't want you to do that. What about Rosh Chodesh? The blessing of the new month? What would that be? Let's think about it, guys. Come. If we're saying for Brit Milah, the Greeks objected to it because they were objecting to the particularity of the Jewish body, or the Jewish body saying, I'm different. Why would they just so with Rosh Chodesh, the Greeks were saying, or the Greeks saying, don't claim to have your own idea of what time is. Time is so much integral to who we are as Jews. Without going into the whole story, Rosh Chodesh is not just, we say, oh, there's a new month now. The original mitzvah was the observation and the declaration, the making in a way of holiness and time, right? So it's not only a protest about Jewish time, it's a protest about Jewish holiness. Jewish holiness is made through our activities, made through our creativity. And Shabbat is, in a way, it's the simplest one, is, what are Jews known for? What are Jews known for in the world? Like, they're Shabbos Jews, right? You keep Shabbos. No matter how many holidays we have, Shabbos, everybody knows Shabbos. And that is so important cognitively, experientially, because it tells you in the most physical way that there's a God. Because you're participating in this recognition every week. So the Greeks wanted to nullify Jewish claims to particularity. Are people asking me questions in the chat?
No, they're answering the questions.
Oh, you're answering the questions in the chat? I have to tell you, I just don't this is as multitask as I can do. The chat just becomes, I just can't do it. So you're going to have to call out, okay? Or somebody, Daphne, at an appropriate time, you can interrupt me and you can be the mitargemet or whatever. Here's another interesting observation of the Maharal, which is another kind of key into Chanukah and key into this Greek notion of assimilation. Even though the Greeks assaulted the temple, they didn't destroy it, right? I was just saying before, this is an exile in Jerusalem, strangely enough, right? Similarly, they did not pour out or destroy the oil, right? We all know that's part of the story. Why did they burn it, right? But they rather made it impure. They made it tameh. Because they wanted, Maharal's great here, they wanted to blur the distinction between Israel and the nations. The desecration of the sanctuary and making the oil impure took away the oil's sacred status. Let's go back to the previous sentence. They wanted to blur the distinction between Israel and the nations. So here I do want somebody to reflect on this a little bit. do we see that in contemporary anti-Semitisms? Oh. Robin Gottlieb says Shabbos is also not working. Right. You distinguish yourselves in all sorts of ways. Right. Yeah. So surely people have experiences which are explain this or demonstrate this. I mean, I'm an English professor, right? And there are a lot of Jewish English professors. And now the only way you can be a good English professor is by being a progressive English professor. I wish I were exaggerating, and I'm not, because I spent last year, I was at the Institute for Advanced Studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and we had many visitors from America during the year. And all of them had to be vocal about their anti-Zionism. Because if they don't do that, they don't have membership in the club that they want to be in, which is the English profession, the English literature profession. I mean, the truth is these people were already taking chances because they came to Israel. Many of my colleagues, one or two of them, went back and they found that they were boycotted at their university. Why don't I have any students? And, I think everybody has stories like this. And this is precisely the kind of anti-Semitism. The rabbis say this is the Greek model of anti-Semitism. As long as you're one of us, right? As long as you push aside Jewish claims to particularism, that's fine. One of the tragedies of contemporary anti-Semitism in the academy is that you have a lot of Jews themselves who are BDS, who are part of the boycott, divest, and sanction. I mean, it's most Jews. My colleague said that 70% of the Humanities Academy in America is against the state of Israel. So that universalism, that claim to be universal, that's why one of the reasons we bug the Christians so much, because we're still here, right? Go away. We don't want you to remind us of a million things we don't want to be reminded of, like the whole idea that there's a God or that people actually have to act out of virtue and not desire. Well, we don't want to know that, right? And as Jews, we remind Christians that their claims to universalism they're not full. Meaning they're not realized. No, you're not universal. I'll just see if we can find maybe one or two more passages to look at. Let's see. Oh, we didn't discuss this passage, right? So what did they do with the oil? They didn't render it, they didn't burn it, they didn't eliminate it. That would be more in tune with other exiles. That would be more in tune with Haman and the destruction of the Jews. But they kept the external of the Jew and they took out the inside. And so also, the parallel, they didn't destroy the oil, they rendered it impure. They changed its status, right? And the threat to Jewish identity today, especially on our campuses, is this kind of anti-Semitism, where any indication of doing what everybody else is encouraged to do, right? To scream up about your identity, right? The whole university system today is dominated by identity politics. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that. That's what's celebrated. But when the Jew does that, it's not allowed. And it's very hard to fight this because the Greeks are wise. They have wisdom. We reject the Greeks at our peril, right? By the way, the Chazal are not talking about Plato or Aristotle. They're talking about a culture that thinks itself, it's a very arrogant, self-confident culture, thinks it knows everything. And the Jews are the threat to, we know everything, because you don't. So really, I think, and that's maybe the biggest challenge of anti-Semitism today, is a kind of internal assimilation, where, and internal assimilation eventually leads to the external. I mean, I see there are people of my generation or older who are here. Assimilation is different for us than it is now, because, I mean, I know that I'm a third generation American, and my parents, even though they weren't religious and didn't observe stuff, they were still connected enough to their parents and to the European past to, like, you know, nobody would question my father's Jewishness in any sense. Just they were Jews, right? But that exists less and less now, right? That sense of that connection to the world before the Holocaust, the world of, or just the world of tradition, because the Holocaust, of course, changed everything, right? And it made it much more difficult for many, many people to be Jewish. But today, the pressures of assimilation on campus, intellectual assimilation, this is what ISGAP does, really, right? We're interested in talking about this, right? The pressures that are put on students and faculty to toe the line. It really is. It has become an authoritarian culture. Interestingly enough, it's a culture that claims to be tolerant, which is really, in its mechanisms, is authoritarian. And the way, you see the way it works, the social dynamics, the way younger people, who really, the whole profession works upon money and tenure, like Rabbi Zweig was saying earlier, right? Runs on money. And so it's increasingly more difficult for Jews to publish. It's increasingly more difficult for Jews to get tenure. Right? It depends what kind of Jew you are. If you come out and you say, you know, I'm anti-Israel, then I think you're okay. I think if you said, you know, I don't support the current government, but I'm a Zionist, that's not enough, right? That is not enough, right? There is a kind of, and I think one of the things we lose this perspective. I think the World Cup in Qatar really was an eye-opener for a lot of people. We lose the perspective of how anti-Semitic the world is and how much people hate us, right? I mean, in Qatar, you just saw the casual anti-Semitism of the world. It's just how people act.
We have a comment from Barbara.
Go for it, Barbara. Oh, are we going to read Barbara's comment? Let's see if I can open the chat.
No, she has her hand up. I think she can speak.
Oh, excellent. Great.
All right. Barbara?
Oh, I see Barbara now. Now I'm just, yeah.
I just lost her.
Oh, okay. Now I can see everybody. Oh, here. I was teaching English 23 years at CUNY. The semester, May 2021, before I got fired. Okay. I taught this, it sounds like there's a story there, Barbara. I taught the students how to research how brainwashing is one of the main causes of both racism and anti-Semitism. Then I, along with 4 other Jewish women, professors, were fired. You were not were you tenured, Barbara?
No.
Yeah. So you were an adjunct, but there was no reason for you to be fired other than you were fired with this explicit reason, or you were fired for some other?
No, they claimed that it's because they had student evaluations that were low. But I mean, it was ridiculous because I've been there 23 years and they were never that low for them to fire me. And the contract always said that you have to examine the entire employment, not just 1 or 2 semesters. And they didn't look at the whole employment history. So they violated the contract.
Right. So this is one of, and you can see the rest of Barbara's message. This is one of the passive forms of anti-Semitism. It's the deniable form of anti-Semitism, you know, right? It's deniable, and even though everybody knows it really is anti-Semitism, even the people who are denying it, but the deniability is just one of the mechanisms that are being used against Jews. It's hard to believe. I mean, I guess there are older people here who have experience. You know, my life, my family rode the American wave of prosperity. And when as one of my rabbis said that America was Goshen for Jewish people, right? And when I was growing up, there was no idea that, you know, you weren't, I mean, there was anti-Semitism, but we were privileged. And now I think today that doesn't exist anymore, that people are experiencing, right? The Holocaust was not an aberration, it was a culmination. That's what people forget, right? It wasn't an aberration, it was a culmination. Meaning Jewish history it's not like, oh, but things were great for us before the Holocaust, right? We just had pogroms, right? But it seems like, you know, we have to be inspired by the Maccabees, because we have to fight for Jewish identity in any way that we can. And it's much, for a liberal like me, it's hard to speak about fighting, but sometimes, you know, the cause is real. And we have to do everything we can in order to figure out a way to combat anti-Semitism. I mean, it's such a big thing. I think also educating professors, having conferences like what ISGAP does. I mean, that's what we're really doing, publishing, helping young scholars publish. Also thinking about curricula for high schools and colleges, how we can educate people. So to me, as unsavory as it is, I think, for people like me being a liberal, to think that you actually have to be vigilant and diligent and careful. This is where we are now, because it's Chanukah every day. And for us, the idea is to see the possibility of God's presence where everybody else is denying it. You know, remember that the miracle, there was a war, and a year later, there was the Chanukah miracle. And then the rabbis instituted Chanukah then and said, oh, now we know by the lights of the menorah, now we understood what happened back then, right? Because we recognize the light. Chanukah is the last holiday in the liturgical cycle, right? Meaning it's the latest one, because Chanukah is the holiday of Galut, it really is. And it's strangely the holiday of Galut in Israel. It's the holiday of Galut because it describes this exile and the darkness that we live in. And the challenge is to see the light. So I thought maybe we'd end there. And if people wanted to add things or make suggestions or ask questions. Yeah. Peter.
First of all, Professor, thank you very much. And Daphne, who I've seen in the past, but she doesn't know who the hell I am. And it doesn't matter who I am. I'm a Holocaust survivor.
Okay.
Who was born in Amsterdam. And I'm considerably older than you are, Professor, but not wiser by any means.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
In that sense, I'm calling you from Florida, where I live.
Okay.
And I grew up with Anne Frank. I'm a member of the board of Anne Frank USA. And my ancestry goes back to Nuremberg in Germany, Bavaria, to 1600. Now,
Okay.
one of the intriguing, I'm a published author and I have a website, etc.
Okay, well, we will all check out your website after this lecture. Go ahead, yeah.
But this is not about me. What has intrigued me, and you've been very elucidating also, the rabbi who spoke a little while ago,
Rabbi Zweig,
is you're trying to create a parallel, in my word, or in my impression, of Chanukah and anti-Semitism. Now, many people, professors, you know, better than I do, I'm a lecturer, I'm very busy, I'm not a professor. I'm doing all of this as a passion for Anna, who was my babysitter. We lived 2 apartments away in Amsterdam. And we grew up together. She was 7 years older than I was. But that having been said, I take the Hanukkah, the miracle, if we want to call it that, as a cry of freedom, of liberty. And you have been talking in the last few minutes, in between the lines I'm taking, that we have to stand up. And we have to continue to not give up. It's been 5,783 years. But we have to remember and honor and do practically in what I call from the bima and the pulpit to what we have to do, and translate the noble words into actions, and hopefully be united between ADL, AJC, schools, universities, professors. I also think, and you know this maybe better than I do, that much of the cries of freedom and liberty came through universities.
That's true. That's why we feel betrayed by the university, because they used to be.
It didn't come from the streets. That was a result. 1789 was a result of what happened before. So
Right.
I'm talking about the French Revolution.
I understand.
I'll make a comment. I don't know, where are you located, Professor?
See the Jerusalem stone? Jerusalem.
Oh, fantastic. I just found out that we have new cousins in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem.
Okay. You have, Peter, you have many stories to tell. So share us this one that you were about to tell us.
No, I just leave it at that I think it's an unending process. And it's like teaching. We have to continue, but there are also good signs.
It's very inspirational. So you're saying if we go to your websites, we'll find out a little bit more about what you're talking about here.
I don't know if you're interested in, but
hypothetically, let's say we're interested. That's what I would find there.
Yes, my website.
Because I think what you're saying is really important and really inspirational. And I was saying at the end, you're right. I was emphasizing the negative, but really the Maccabees, they fought back, right? And we have to continue to find ways of being creative and fighting back. And one of them is what Peter said about, it's not just the base medrash, it's not just the pulpit, it's not just the synagogue, but it's all of us doing what we can to show ourselves as Jews. Everybody does that in a different way, right? You can be and that's one of the things about Jewish particularity. It's not only the nation, it's also people. We have to show ourselves as Jews. We do that through our activity. We're all
absolutely
different. Yes. We're all different than we would do that. But we should not think of it like, leave it to others to be inspiring. We can't do that anymore. So thank you, Peter.
I'll end with one thing, Professor.
Good.
Which is a little political. I don't want to talk about the United States at this moment. Not, you live in Israel, so you know what's happening in Israel much better. Until I don't hear our fine Department of Justice, Garland, stand up and within 3 minutes say that we are not putting up in the country with issues, words, writings, and acts that are unconstitutional and against the Constitution.
I appreciate the sentiment, and
that is what we need.
And just extrapolating from what you're actually talking about, I think in a way what you are saying, the American dream really was the realization in some sense of Jewish values for a long time. Right. And now ideas of justice and truth, they don't come out of nowhere. I mean, the Greeks contribute to it, but we're doing the heavy lifting. Barbara, did you have a question?
Yeah, I would just like to say that yes, we have to stand up and speak, but then the fact is nobody's listening and they don't care. Like we had 8 hours of testimony that's been recorded on public television of all the anti-Semitic, excuse me, all the anti-Semitism at the 25 colleges of CUNY, and nobody's doing anything. Like they put up a website to report these type of things, but nothing, there's no penalty.
I hear you. You know, you know what? It's that reality that makes idealism seem really futile, and I hear that 1,000,000%. But I think people, maybe of Peter's generation, understand this better than we do. The rabbinic dictum that, you know, even though you can't finish the task, it doesn't mean you cannot be part of it. Meaning that's the ultimate expression of saying, I have hope in the face of utter hopelessness. I don't think, you know, people really realize, Peter, your exception, you know, how different the world is without the Jewish state and how insecure people were, how insecure Jews were.
We're still insecure. I mean,
I understand that. Yeah, I get that. I'm just saying, you know, I was thinking of the Magen of Ram, who was a descendant of somebody I talked to today, or she was a descendant of him. And I remember he used to write on his walls with ink because he couldn't afford the paper, right? And now he's one of the canonical rabbinic commentators in the Shulchan Aruch. Whatever. We're not, it's our task to be Jews, not easy.
Well, I think
we got soft in America, right? I'm soft. We got soft in America because
there's even a Russian Jewish Hillel leader who started a whole big group at Baruch College in CUNY, which is more, you know, run by a lot of Jews and heads of departments. And even all the groups he got together from different colleges, not only CUNY, they're still not doing anything. I kept telling them, you need to have penalties for people who are doing these kinds of biased hate crimes. There's no penalties. So there's no repercussions.
So you're doing the one thing that's possible, is you're persisting.
Well, to answer Barbara, Professor, if I may just say one thing. I think people are listening, but unfortunately in America, about 40% are the wrong ones listening.
Yeah.
So that's one of the problems. The other thing is, and this is something that I don't know that we do enough, Professor, and that is to teach people something that I'm doing and we are trying to do at Anna Frank, is what do Jewish people do, construct, build, and leave to the world that nobody knows they're now still using, but they were Jewish. But still we be insulted with caricatures with a little fellow with a nose and a bag of money.
Okay. Yes, we have been fighting
and there is something there that we are neglecting, I think.
Okay. So listen, thank you very, very much, Peter. I think it's a good time to end with your.
Well, I thank you. Words. It's been very elucidating, and everybody else has been
very much. So we encourage you to come to all of the ISGAP lectures, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm trying.
Right, Daphne, do you have any fabulous coming attractions for us?
Yes, we have 3 upcoming courses. It would be lovely if you guys could join. We have an upcoming course with author Ben Freeman about Jewish pride. We have a course with Professor David Patterson where he's going to break down and discuss the essence of anti-Semitism. And we have a course with Aaron Frew and Dr. Diane Martin where they're going to discuss Christian anti-Semitism. And they're all
She's
very
great.
interesting.
Don't miss Diane. She's really amazing. I mean, don't
Yeah,
miss anything. But also, Ben has a following, right? He's got like a younger people following. So we're hoping we're going to bring down the average age a little bit. Right?
Yes, Ben does appeal to Gen Z, so we'll have some younger faces.
You'll have to explain that to us some other time. Okay. Thank you very much, people. It's great to see everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Peter, it was great seeing you. Thank you. Have a great week.
Happy Chanukah.
Happy Chanukah. Hag Sameach.
Happy Chanukah. Hag Sameach.
That's right.